All right. Now we see chapter 2 begins with the three banquets that we had in chapter 1. They're over. The banquet with the 180 days, the banquet that was 7 days, both banquets given by the king, and then the banquet that was also given by Vashti. They're they're over. And now we come to the aftermath, where now the king, in a more sober tone and a sober behavior and more reflective, his anger has dissipated. And now he looks back and he realizes and remembers Vashti. And he remembers what she had done, and also the fate that he gave out to her. It still lingers in his mind, and we will come to realize or it's worth noting that in both cases that we will find the king's anger, it is as a result of a spousal problem. In the first case, Queen Vashti threatens his authority. She disobeys him, his command. And so he is angry because she embarrassed him. She made him look like he's less of a man. She
Oh
really,
man.
really kicked his ego, so to speak. And so he's angry about that. But we also see a second anger in the book that will come from the king, and that is when his chief officer, Haman, threatens the new queen, Esther, and her people, and to even when she goes, when he's going to go and beg her to spare him, and the king is going to become very upset, and we will see that in chapter 7. So both times that the king is really angry, it is something to do with one of his wives, whether it is that she disobeyed him in the form of in the person of Vashti, or whether or not someone seems to be threatening his wife in the form of Haman threatening the Queen Esther. So just wanted to touch that for you, since one of the times of his anger have passed in chapter 1. And so it is apparent that Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, experiences intense anger only in matters of the heart. And so we don't see that coming out in his governing the kingdom, but we see that happening in the way in his anger coming out when it comes to matters of the heart. Now, when we look at verse 1, we see we see here, later when the anger of King Xerxes had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. And one of the things that we have to grapple with is that, remember, he had a wife, he disobeyed him, and then what happened? His advisors tell him that he needs to get rid of her, because if he doesn't, then all their wives will start wanting to do the same thing to them. And so here is it, and he went ahead with it. He had an edict, and he banished her from his presence. So now the king is wifeless, but all of them have their wives still. So, they advised him to get rid of his wife, but they kept their wives. And so he now is wifeless. Probably the reason why he started thinking about Vashti, because he realizes that he now has no wife at all. So that is one thing that we need to look at. The other thing we need to look at too, when it speaks about Xerxes remembering Vashti, and the Hebrew word that is used for remembering in this context is a word that denotes a sense of compassion. So it can be seen as it is possible that he may be reconsidering what he did, However, in those days, once he did a royal edict or a royal decree, he himself could not reverse it. And so what was done was already done. And therefore, as much as he may have wanted to reverse it, he couldn't. Um, um, and so he may have been, as he reflected in this verse on his failed marriage, he may have been thinking, was I too hasty to take the counsel or the advice of those who he asked? And so he may have been considering this whole notion.
You mean he probably had a guilty conscience?
Yes, he probably had a guilty conscience. That is true. But the whole thing is that his personal attendants took his distress to heart, and they will scramble to alleviate, knowing that he needed a queen to ensure some level of stability for the rest of the kingdom. And so we will see this playing out now in verses 2 to 4. And we read, then the king's personal attendants proposed, let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful girls into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. So here we have, as I said earlier, just now, this wifeless king now again taking some more advice from his personal attendants as to now how to remedy that situation in finding himself a queen. And so we find here that the proposal that was given to him pleases him, and he goes along with it. He acts upon it. So here we have a solution is given, and it's almost now becomes like a beauty contest of royal proportions to determine who this next queen will be. So it is interesting to see that playing out. Now, when we read, and one of the things I should also mention here, that we see also in verses 3 to 4, that there's a similarity with Genesis chapter 41 and verses 34 to 37, where there's this kind of a parallel that seems to suggest that whoever wrote Esther may have modeled his or her work after the story of Joseph in the Genesis, because both accounts, both the Joseph story and the Esther story are both set in these sort of kingdoms, these sort of courts of foreign monarchs. Joseph is in Egypt and Esther is in Persia, and they become the kind of like the Jewish heroes in the stories who rise to prominence, and they provide a means by which they save their people. As you know, with Joseph saved the people from the Israelites, the Jews from the famine, and Esther saves her people from annihilation, as we will find later on. So you see this kind of dance between these two stories. There's kind of a correlation. They're parallel with each other, where we have these two Jewish people who are placed in a situation of humility. Joseph is placed as was a prisoner at one time in Egypt, after having been sold. And here we find now Esther, who is part of the diaspora in the Persian Empire, will be brought into this harem. And so you see this whole notion of humility as well playing out, but humility that will get them to be in the positions that they they become. Joseph as the second in command to the Pharaoh in Egypt, and Esther as the king's wife. So I just wanted to mention that there's that correlation between them. Now, when we look at verse 5 and 6, we read, now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiachin, king of Judah. And so here we see the introduction now for the first time of Mordecai. This man who is very much a Jew. What we're going to be seeing here, because we will see also in verse 7, what we are seeing here is that the search for a new queen is underway, and in comes the introduction of the book's two main Jewish characters, Mordecai and Esther. And so we hear about Mordecai, or we are introduced to Mordecai in verses 5 and 6. He's a Jew, although his name is derived from Marduk, the Babylonian god. And it means that he, and by having such a name, one will think that he would have been a heathen, but he is far from anything that is heathen. He is very much a spiritual man who's very much in touch with God and knows how God functions and operates, and he's there to save his people. And the thing about Mordecai as well is that he traces his ancestry back to Kish, the father of King Saul, the first king of Israel. And also he is from the tribe of Benjamin. He's a Benjaminite. And you know the 12 tribes were originated out of the sons of Jacob, and Benjamin and Joseph were the two children of Rachel. The other 10 sons were of Leah. And so Benjamin is the last child, actually. And so Mordecai is from that tribe. And also we will realize about Mordecai is that his family history and his personal experience tells us that he was one of those who were probably exiled in Babylon, hence the name that he has that may have originated from there. Who knows? He may have been like Esther. He had a Jewish name, because you will realize too that it was not uncommon for Israelites to have two names. So it could have been that he had another name, and when he was in exile in Babylon, he took on the name Mordecai, the same way that you will find that Esther has the name Hadassah, but she takes on the name Esther when she lived in Persia. So it could be that possibility. So then we read verse 7, Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl, who was also known as Esther, was lovely in form and features, and Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. So here we have this situation where Esther was an orphan, and she was Mordecai's cousin. They say that she's like an adopted daughter. The word adopted daughter, I think, later on, since she had no parents. But that does not mean that he may have legally adopted her. It just means that he took care of her, and so she would have shared a home with him. Any of you watch? Was it one of you that told me that I should watch the movie Esther?
Lorraine. I did.
Lorraine, I watched it, and I think, and it was really good. And at least I don't know if it's the same one that Lorraine watched, but the one I watched was pretty accurate. It was pretty decent film. So if you get to watch it, you should. I watched it on. I don't know. I mean, all the TVs nowadays. A lot of them nowadays are or smart TV. But if you have the Pluto app, I watched it on the Pluto app, but it was really good. I enjoyed it really. And so we find here that Mordecai is like a father figure to this young lady. And one of the things that we need to also, not necessarily that it's the case, but one of the things that is interesting to note is that he adopts this female cousin who doesn't have, but he himself never had a wife or children, and having some sort of access to the court of the harem may imply that he was probably a eunuch as well. It is possible that Mordecai could have been a eunuch also. That does not mean that that's carved in stone that he was, because there's no mention of it that he was, but it is possible that he could have been. Now, the name Hadassah, which means myrtle, is the Hebrew name that Esther had. And then afterwards, she, when Mordecai told her not to identify herself, but to use the name Esther, which is a Persian name meaning star. So, and it is the name Esther is possibly derived from the Babylonian goddess of love, Ishtar. So here is it. We see, as I said, it wasn't uncommon for Israelites to have two names, a Hebrew name and a Gentile name. And here we see it in Esther, where she's Hadassah, but she's also Esther. And even though she did not grow up with a female, an older woman to guide her or to mentor her and how it means to be a child of God or a woman of God, we can fairly say that Mordecai did a pretty good job in terms of her upbringing, her religious and spiritual upbringing, that he did a pretty fine job there. And the real interest in Esther, which we will come across, is her appearance. We read just now that she was lovely in form and features. So her physical beauty is something that is going to connect with folks, and folks are going to be impressed with, and we will find that she will find favor with all sorts of people as she goes through this situation, this process. So Esther so let's go to verse 8 and then we'll continue. Let's go to verse 8. Any questions so far? Everybody understanding so far? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many girls were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Haggai. Esther also was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai, who had charge of the harem. The girl pleased him and won his favor. Immediately, he provided her with her beauty treatments and special food. He assigned to her 7 maids, selected from the king's palace, and moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. So already we see that Esther is being given special treatment. She's being given special treatment. She has been taken along with all the others in the harem, but apparently as well, she is one that is shining out of the darkness around. Here we see this whole notion of her name, star, really becoming, really living up to her name. She's becoming a star in the rest of the harem there. So that is interesting. And one thing we will see the author drives home in this chapter is that she won everyone's favor. You already see that she has won the favor of Haggai, who is in charge of the harem. Her beauty, her character apparently causes her to get people to be pleased with her. And so we will see that there's this attractiveness to her at least 6 times, I think, in verses 8, in 8 verses from verse 9 to 17. You will see that there's some sort of favor toward her actions or her manner or her countenance. And one of the things that we need to realize, as I said, we are going to go through this book and we are going to look at the points where we see God is at work in the story. And one of the ways that we can see God at work in the story is this word favor. Some of you may have a different word, but it's this word favor, because once the word favor is mentioned, and it's mentioned frequently in scripture, once the word favor is applied in scripture, remember in the story with Mary, with Jesus's birth, that she found favor with God. And the word favor in the Bible, in scripture, comes from God. If you are experiencing favor, it's coming from God. And I want you to even think about that in your own life as well. That if you have been favored for something, that God had a hand in doing it, that God was present and in the midst of doing this. And so we see this sort of thing happening with Esther, where she finds favor with all sorts of people. And so I want you to think about it as well, where when you are found favor of, that God was in the midst of that in the same way. You get where I'm coming from here? You understand me? Right. So don't only think of it as, oh, this is only appropriate for the Bible. No, it is also appropriate for us as well, as people of God, as children of God. Now, so you find, as I said, she found favor with Haggai, who's in charge of the harem. And this is evident by what has been given to her. She's given beauty treatments, special food, 7 maids. And you hear that number 7 again, which is very perfection, and so forth, perfect number, complete number. She's given the best place in the harem. So she gains such favor that she's being given special treatment over the other virgins that are in the harem. And it is obvious that Haggai, who was a eunuch, who had nothing to gain personally from Esther's advancement, saw something special in her, and felt that she was qualified to be his king's consort, his king's spouse. So that is interesting. And one of the other things we got to look at as well is that we hear this special food, and the special food, we might think that she got better food than others, which could be true, but the special food here could also denote as well that she was not eating the Jewish dietary foods. She was not following the Jewish dietary laws, because if she did, she would be found out that she's a Jew, and therefore she could have been, the special food in this context could also have been that she was eating the Persian food and not eating what she should have been eating as a Jew. Because as we know, Jews had certain dietary laws and certain foods they could eat and not eat. And so the special food that she's being given could be twofold. It could be that, yes, she you look at a chicken, instead of she being given the wing, she was given the breast. That is quite possible. But at the same time, it could be as well that the special food here could have been that she was eating the Persian food, and most likely she would have been anyhow if she doesn't want to reveal her Jewish identity.
Now, is it possible that she got arrested somehow?
That she got what?
Arrested.
For?
for hiding her identity that she was Jewish?
The book doesn't tell us that. No. I
But
mean,
it's
she was
possible.
obviously. Oh, you mean if she could have gotten arrested? Oh,
Yeah.
if she could have gotten arrested. Oh, of course she could have. She probably could have gotten killed too. So yes. Oh, I misinterpreted your question. I thought you were asking me if it did happen to her, but you're asking if it could have happened to her if she was found out. And it could have happened to her, where some sort of punishment could have been meted out to her.
But Mordecai told her not to reveal that she was Jewish.
Correct. He did. And obviously he knew that but you see, the thing is about us as well is he knew that if she had revealed herself, her identity, then yes, something could have happened to her, or she would not have found favor with the king, because really and truly in those days, the king should have chosen a bride from one of the leading families of Persia, not from I don't even know why they went down the road with having a harem and virgins for the king, because if you remember, I said last week, Vashti was most likely after royal line as well. So Vashti is not what Iris and the British will say. She wasn't no commoner. She had a little bit of clout, but obviously Esther didn't. And so again, you could see, and I want you to pick these pieces and tie them in together. You could see God being at work, because they did not go through the conventional way of choosing a queen. If they had, Esther would not have been chosen. So we have this situation where Esther, that God was in the presence of all of this, and even those men who were the king's personal assistants, servants, they suggesting that option, that process of finding the queen, was God's way of using them, so that he didn't go the traditional way of finding a queen, because that was not the traditional way of finding a queen.
So I have a question for you.
Yes, and then Alita, you had your hand too? Yes, okay, Iris and then Alita. Go ahead.
So in other words, he puts out an edict for all the virgins to come forward. So the fathers just gave the girls in, did they? And then they said, oh, you and you. There must have been hundreds of young virgins. They just had to come forward. There was no, they couldn't hide. They had to come forward. Is that how it worked?
Well, yes, and if they didn't, if you watch the picture, is interesting. Not that I'm saying that the picture is totally accurate, but the depiction of the picture was they had to either come forward, and if they didn't, they went in search for them. So it was almost almost like the Moses story, when Moses was in a babe and they went into all the homes trying to kill all the 2-year-old boys and under. And so they went in search of these girls apparently as well. So the whole notion was, yes, they expected you. There was an edict, it was posted, and you were supposed to obey that edict. And if you didn't, the king's men will come and get you, so to speak. So in fact, when you watch the picture, you will see that Mordecai tried to hide Hadassah, Esther, from being chosen, but she was found out when they came in together, when they came in and realized, because they were told that a young lady lived here, and he wanted to cover her. He had her hidden, but she couldn't think. Yes, Elita. But good question, Iris.
Yes. Did the king know that Mordecai was Jewish?
I believe, yes, because Mordecai never hid his Judaism. He never did. He for whatever reason, he hid Esther's, but you will remember, and we haven't got into it yet, but you will know that Haman knew that he was a Jew. And so the chance, and the king also, I think by the time when the king rewards him, honors him for saving his life, which is going to be the plot that is at the end of chapter 2, the king also would have known he was a Jew. Yes, he never hid his Judaism, but he made sure that Esther did not reveal hers. And again, that might have, you see, we can look at it as that might have been God's way of telling him that, to tell her because of the plan that God had. Yes. So yeah, so he never hid his. Let me see. So what we see is here happening is that Esther is already being treated like a queen, although she's not a queen yet. Being given the special treatment, she's already being treated as if she is the queen. And so Haggai seems certain about her potential, that he tries to give her every advantage he tries to give her every advantage she can possibly get, even to the point of giving her advice on what she ought to take with her when she goes in the night to be with the king. So let's continue. Verse 10, Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. So we could see here that Mordecai apparently is keeping vigil, as outside the palace gate, so as to make sure that all is well with Esther. So you will realize that the bond between the two of them will remain, because as we go through the book, you will find that message will get from him to Esther in the palace. Although he's outside of the palace, message will get to Esther in the palace from him in a sort of a roundabout way. So we will see that shaped out as well. In verse 12, before a girl's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. I said this morning, boy, man, ladies would love that. 12, a year of being beautified, cosmetics, and all of this, and it's all free.
No, it wasn't free. They had to go to the king.
You're onto something, Alita. You're onto something, Alita. So I was like, oh my golly, women would have loved had a heyday with that. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go there, and in the morning, return to another part of the harem to the care of Xerxes, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. And so what we see happening here in verses 12 to 14 is now the scene is now being set for choosing this queen. We are hearing what the preparation is like. And remember when Xerxes lost Vashti, that was in the 3rd year of his reign. Esther never came until the 7th year of his reign. So there was a 4-year gap where the king was wifeless. And so And so, and we can now see why, if you can take your whole year to beautify, to go if it's going to take your whole year to beautify yourself to go and see the king, you can imagine that why it would have taken so long for him to find a queen. So, so um, all these girls were supposed to have this kind of treatment. And one of the things that it tells you too is that you prepared yourself for this beautifying treatment and having whatever you want to take with the king, to take in with you for the king. And then one by one, the women will go into the king's bedroom for a night with the king, resulting in this whole royal concubinage, if you want to call it. And it can be repeated based on the king's desire. And we find here too is that what is quite notable is that obviously you came out of the harem of virgins, but then you had to go into the harem of concubines because you can't go back to the virgins. You're no longer a virgin. And therefore you find that you cross from one harem to the next by that one night being with the king. The thing that I looked at and I thought about when I was reading this and looking at this, I said to myself, but you can imagine this whole group of ladies who become concubines for the king, and these are the king's concubines. Remember, these can't go to no other man because these people get a whole year of treatment, man. The king, you know, you can't just say, well, pass them off to somebody else. But you have this situation where with all these concubines and they're unable to find themselves a husband because they're now become almost like sorry for pardon the expression, but like the property of the king, where now he can have any of them whenever he feels like doing so. So you've passed from the harem of virgins to the harem of concubines, and you stay as a concubine waiting to see if the king will ever call you again to have a night with him.
Father Tony?
Yes, Marilyn.
So you weren't feeling sorry for him then that he didn't have a wife for 4 years.
But the thing about it is, you see, and that's a good question that you are asking, because it brings to mind something else, and that is, I am sure he still had concubines from before, and therefore he would have still probably be intimately pleasured, but at the same time he did not have that person who is the queen, who is the queen. And
I don't think he was lonely for 4 years though.
Well, that's what I'm saying. He had all these concubines, so he wasn't lonely. That's why I was saying he wasn't lonely in the intimacy department, but he was lonely in terms of having a kind of like a permanent or a person who is his companion there. Mind you, though, the companionship thing in those days, although you could say, yes, there was a companionship, there was really no companionship too, because they did not sleep together. She had her own section of the palace. He had his own. She couldn't even, and you will realize this as we go through, when she says, if I perish, I perish. And because she cannot even go and have an audience with the king unless he summoned her. Yes, unless he asked her or he summoned her. To go in front of the king without being summoned could result in death. Unless he stretches out his scepter to her for her to touch, which means, okay, I acknowledge you and I will not kill you, you know. And this is the thing is about Esther that we will come to realize that Esther, although she was a humble lady and a submissive lady, she was a very, very, very courageous woman, because she did not only go to the king once, she went to him at least twice without being summoned by him. So So yeah, I agree with you, Marilyn. I don't think that he was lonely in the intimacy department, but he would have been lonely in terms of having a companion, and put that word in inverted commas, in terms of having a queen. Yes.
She must have had
Yes, Lorraine?
now I'm losing my train of thought. She
Yeah.
must have been something special to him aside from intimacy, because or she wouldn't have had so much power with him.
Yes, and that is where, and you're making a good point, because as I said last week, Vashti apparently in his early ministry had a lot of influence on him. We are not sure how that took place, but somehow it happened. And you will realize eventually Esther seemed to also had influence as well. Obviously, in terms of with Haman, for example, that is great influence, and it will continue toward the end of the book as well. Yeah, and you can surmise that after that, she had some sort of power or some sort of influence, for lack of a better word, with the king. So yes, the fact that he seemed to miss her in terms of what he did tells that even although they may not have been a lapse in certain departments, yet what she brought to the table, these concubines did not bring. Yeah. And he needed that. And so yes, so you are onto something there as well, Lorraine.
Probably was very intelligent.
I didn't hear that. Who's that? Oh, Maureen. Yes, Maureen.
It was very intelligent, and that's what it.
Yeah, right. Intelligent.
Say that again.
It's probably very intelligent.
Oh, you mean Vashti?
Esther, when he met her.
Yeah, well, she is, and we will realize that she is a very intelligent woman, but also too, Vashti could have been as well. And because you see, we are dealing with a king who is very impulsive, who can be swayed one way or the other. We see it with his advisors. He doesn't seem to make decisions on his own, and he needs someone to help him to make these decisions. Both Vashti and Esther obviously were intelligent women who knows how to do things, and also realizing that he might not have been as intelligent and be able to steer him in certain directions. We don't know.
He was easily manipulated.
Yes, correct. He was easily manipulated. That is very true. Very true.
Iris?
That was a joke.
Because of the loyal, as we thought she was probably had a lot of education, was very, the royals weren't the same as the virgins, the little virgins that came.
Yeah.
I think she was probably very, very intelligent and had a good brain.
Who's this?
Vashti.
Yes, Vashti.
The brain is totally different from
Esther. Yeah, Vashti, well, you see, the thing is about it is, and then I'll come to Marilyn, because I think I saw Marilyn's hand up. But the thing is about the two women, one was of regal blood, of royal blood, or at least had royal blood flowing through her veins. And therefore, there's that kind of intelligence. But at the same time, and it goes back to wisdom. You remember I preached a sermon not too long ago about worldly wisdom and godly wisdom. And so I think what you see here, and it's a good point you're making, I think what you see here, that Vashti may have had worldly wisdom because she knows how the monarchy works, and she knows how the world is, and so forth. Not that the wisdom is bad in its sense, but she had that kind of intellectual wisdom that can help to a man like Xerxes, who, as Maureen quite rightly said, is easily manipulated. Esther, on the other hand, had, I believe, godly wisdom. She was influenced and inspired by God. And so when she said things, they were of a divine nature. They were of a godly nature, a heavenly nature. So I think you see, and this is interesting that you all are bringing these things out, because I didn't even think of these things, but you were right, because they are depicted. They're showing these women against comparing these women in the sense that one can have the earthly or intellectual kind of wisdom versus the godly kind of wisdom, which deals with relationships and all this sort of stuff. And that is what Esther has. Yes. Marilyn.
It just came to mind the idiom that behind every good man, there's a good or better woman behind him.
Correct. Correct. That is true. That is true. That is true. That is true. As I said this morning, I don't remember what was the context I was saying it. I said, and I think I said that, Esther was a humble, and she was quite submissive, because she was submissive to Mordecai and so forth and so forth. But also she knew when to put her foot down, and when she puts her foot down, she was right in when she put her foot down. So you have this whole notion that she knew how to get around her husband. And it comes out in the book as well. But when you watch the movie, especially when she wants to get to tell the king about Haman, she tells the king, she invites him and Haman to the king and Haman to a banquet, and letting him know that she has something to tell him. But then when he wants to find out what it is she wants, she doesn't tell him. She says, I'm bringing you to another banquet tomorrow. And she softens him up. She softens him up. Gets him to where she wants him, and he wants to know. And now she says, okay, honey, I'll bring you to there'll be another banquet tomorrow, and I will tell you then what it is I want. And that is what happens in the story. Okay, let's move on, because it's 1 minute to 7. Let's move on. Where am I now? We are at verse 15. Yes. When the turn came for Esther, the girl Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of his uncle Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. So here we see now it is Esther's turn to go into the king's residence to be with the king. And here we see it recalls her relationship with Mordecai. And it emphasizes that she respects what Haggai advised as well. So she's finding favor with everyone. So in the same way she respects Mordecai, she respects Haggai. She doesn't take anything she feels like taking on her own. She goes along with what Haggai says. Take this or don't take this, and she will do it. And so that's what you find that she does. And so she shows a respect for Haggai. And she's admired by all as she prepares for the role of queen. And then we find in verse 17, now the queen was attracted to Esther. Now the king, was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women. And she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, and Esther's banquet for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distribute gifts with royal liberality. And so we find here now that again, God is present because the king finds favor now with Esther, and so Esther now is selected as queen, and and we also noticed too, even like, you know, when she came into the royal palace, it would have been probably late December, 483 BC or whatever it was, during the king's reign. And so she is made queen. There's another banquet. We don't know how long this one was, but it's almost like, you know, something special happens. It's the king's marriage. Something special happens, and everybody gets a holiday. So there's a holiday, and there's gifts being distributed, and probably wine and food flowing like milk and honey and all that good stuff. But it is another big party that the king is putting on, because now for 4 years I had no wife. Now I have a wife again. And so it becomes an important party. Go ahead, Lorraine.
I looked up where he got his money from. The wealth.
Uh-huh.
I know this is kind of old news, but since you're bringing this up, it says Ahasuerus, is that also what he's known as?
Generally Ahasuerus,
generally is portrayed as vacillating, lacking in character, and easily swayed, but the positive aspects of his personality are also emphasized. He is depicted as one of the few kings in history who ruled over the entire earth. Before his death, Nebuchadnezzar had placed all the treasures of the world he had looted in a ship and sunk it in the Euphrates to prevent anyone finding them. God, however, had revealed their location to Cyrus, and he gave orders that the temple was to be built. Ahasuerus' great wealth derived from this treasure.
Yes. Thank you. If you could send that to me, that will be great. If that is something that you could send to me by email, that will be great. Okay, so that I can send that out to everyone in the class. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you for that. So now we come to the final part of this chapter, which deals now with Mordecai uncovering a conspiracy. It reads, when the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. But Esther had kept secret her family background and the nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. And note again, you see the emphasis on her keeping her nationality and her family background a secret. The second time it's mentioned in this chapter. And during the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bithana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were hanged on a gallows. All this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. So here we see Mordecai, that the chapter ends with this: Mordecai being at the king's gate. He overhears these two angry officers of the king who were supposed to protect the king, and they were planning a plot. They were plotting to assassinate him. And so he conveys the news to Esther. Obviously, he didn't go in the palace to do that. He got it through some means. Probably, it is possible he could have gotten it through Haggai, because Mordecai also seemed to have some sort of correlation or communication with the harem, because he was finding out how Esther was doing. So obviously, the way how he was finding that out, he had some sort of communication with the harem, and so it is possible that it was through that way that he got word to Esther. And the plot is thwarted, and the would-be assassins are killed on the gallows. And it shows, and what it does is it introduces into the narrative this whole motif of the hanging of the king's enemies. And you will find that this will happen to Haman, that the hanging, it introduces this whole narrative. And the plot attempt is recorded in the Royal Chronicles. Now, you will find, it doesn't say it yet, but later on in the story, it will reap great dividends for Mordecai. In fact, you'll find that Mordecai will also become almost like a Joseph figure in Genesis, because he is going to move from from humility, and he will be exalted. And that is a theme too that runs through this book as well, of humility and exaltation. And if you're too exalted, you will be humble in terms of Haman. So we are going to see that playing out itself as well. So we see here that this young girl who was an orphan, whose name means star, will shine brilliantly going forward in the book. She's trustworthy, she's obedient, she's humble, she's teachable, she's charming, she's submissive, she's wise, she's faithful. And we see all of these things coming out in this chapter, but you will also see later on that she's courageous. She's a courageous woman. And so Esther's character, some scholars will say, serves as a model for Christian women today, in the way how she conducted herself, being humble but yet courageous in the same way. And so here we have it in chapter 2 as the plot thickens, as the soap opera continues. You have now the whole notion now of the characters are, the only character who has not featured yet is Haman, but we have all the characters except for Haman, and we will see Haman coming up in chapter 3, which we will talk about next week. Any questions?
A last bit of humor.
Yes, Lorraine.
If you ever, that show, The Bachelor. And
I've heard about it, but I have never watched it. I've heard
about it.
Reminds
me of it. And then these women, they come down to 3 and they're invited into the fantasy suite. And then it's like, nothing ever changes, does it?
Well, at least you could say that I guess it's a reality show, because I think I know it's a reality show. So, well, at least you could say that the reality show is based on the Bible. Esther. But yes, that is a neat one. You see, that is how we look at things. Do anyone see anything else of how God may be at work in the story, in this chapter? In this particular chapter, did you see any other ways that God was present?
Well, I think God wanted Esther on the throne.
Yes. Obvious. Yes. That is obvious. That is true. That is very true.
I mean, it's...
And through
that is true.
She was being protected by God.
Yes.
In order to keep her ancestry a secret.
Yes. Because her cover could have been blown, and it wasn't. So again, God was closing the mouths of those that needed to be closed, and letting this whole thing play out. Yes, very true. So yes, that both you, Maureen and Iris, you're on to correct things there as far as God wanting her on the throne. And as I said earlier, that was not generally the process for a king to choose a wife. And so for that to happen, that God was playing, because it was no other way that Esther could have become queen if it had gone through the correct process. So So yes.
were the Jews at that time were being treated? I mean, were they planning on getting rid of the Jews, or was the
You see, the thing is about it is the Jews had always had a reasonably good life in Persia. In fact, Persia was probably one of the few places where they were captive and in exile that treated them very well. By this time, some of them had already gone back to Jerusalem. These are the remnant or the diaspora that remain, and they were all over the kingdom, and there were still quite a lot of them. And they were being treated well. But it is Haman where that changes because of his dislike for Mordecai. And that's why I say that Haman knew Mordecai was a Jew. And that is why he wanted the Jews annihilated. Because Mordecai, you will find as we start to read in chapter 3, Mordecai refused to bow down to him. Where everybody else was bowing to him, Mordecai never did. And this really got under his skin. It really angered him. So although all the other hundreds or thousands were bowing, he didn't care. He was more focused on this one man who wouldn't. And that is where the whole thing starts to escalate and things like that. But so yeah, yeah. So the Jews didn't have a bad life in Persia. They did it in the sense, because they could have all left. And even you will find that after Esther, they went back, because two of the people who were living in Persia at the time with the Esther story were Ezra and Nehemiah. And you know the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. And they will subsequently also leave Persia and return to Jerusalem, where the wall was built and the temple was built and all this sort of stuff was done. And whereas Nehemiah becomes like the governor and is more of the political guy, Ezra is the more spiritual guy of the Jews when they return from exile in Persia.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Nope.
Any other thoughts? All right, it's 7:14. Good. Oh, we're not doing too badly. So next week now we will look at chapter 3, read upon it, read the book. As there's a prayer in one of our collects. I think it hasn't come yet. It will come closer to the end and closer to Christ the King Day. It says, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest. And so continue reading, continue. It's good to see you all. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Okay.
All right.
Night.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.